1 o'clock. Should we get started?
Yeah, go for it. Take it away.
Sure. Yeah. And people can trickle in as I do this quick little introduction. So thanks everybody for attending on this day after the long weekend lunch and learn session. We're really happy to have everybody here. My name is Emily, and I coordinate the Students Young Professionals Network of the CCGHR, or the Canadian Coalition for Global Health Research. For those of you that don't know the CCGHR, we're a member-based, not-for-profit organization that aims to promote better and more equitable health worldwide. And one component of the CCGHR is our Students Young Professionals Network. And what that is a 200-member network of students and young professionals who are interested in global health research, as well as practice in global health. It's a very dynamic network with a lot of different programs and initiatives. And one of the most recent initiatives that we've been working on is our Ottawa Hub of young professionals. So I'll pass it along to Dan to tell you a little bit more about the Ottawa Hub and also to provide a bit more introduction around this webinar.
Great. Thanks a lot, Emily. Yeah, so that was a fantastic overview of the CCGHR and the Students and Young Professionals Network. The purpose of the Ottawa Hub was really to kind of begin organizing a network of young professionals in the Ottawa area and kind of facilitate some of those in-person connections. And this was really one of the earlier hubs to start regionalizing the network. So we're just starting out here, and obviously right now geographic borders don't really, mean a whole lot since we can't have those in-person connections. But we're interested in generating some interest in the Ottawa Hub, and so we're happy to provide you this webinar today as part of that movement. And I'm pretty excited for this panel we have today. We have some panelists who are going to be discussing some very pertinent career-related topics and questions that I think are on the minds of a lot of students and young professionals as they move into the workforce during this time. So it's my hope that everyone will find the advice and information that's shared here to be very informative and helpful. I'm going to hand off the reins to Lisa, who's our first speaker, in a couple of minutes here. But first, I just wanted to go over a few technical things. So Lauren, if you could just advance the slide by one there. Great. So just to start, this webinar is going to be recorded and it will be shared with everyone who's registered to attend today. So with that being said, we're just asking that people be mindful of what they're sharing in the chat box, just to protect your privacy and security. Try not to share any sort of personal or sensitive information there. We will be having a question and answer session at the end of our webinar, so you'll have an opportunity to ask some questions at this time. Please feel free to share your questions as we go in the chat box, and we'll be writing them down, and we can ask them to our speakers at that time. Alternatively, you can use the raise hand function during the Q&A to ask questions to the presenters directly. And finally, we have the fantastic Lauren Murray from CanWaCH, who's going to be providing us with some technical support for the webinar. So if you run into any sort of technical issues during the call, you can reach out to her using the chat box. So if you could just advance one more, Lauren, there, that'd be great. Okay, so here's our agenda today. Our webinar will consist of 3 10-minute presentations, one from each of our speakers, and then it will be followed by a Q&A session, which is open to all the panelists at the end. So I'll go ahead and introduce our panelists. So our next slide there. So our first speaker is Lisa Metselaar, who is an experiential learning and placement coordinator with Western University in the Department of Health Sciences and Kinesiology. Then we'll hear from Alli Bunting, who is a programs and operations manager at CanWaCH. And to round off our panel today, we have Ryan Kennery, who is a senior strategist at MediaStyle. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what they have to say, and that's enough for me. And so I'll hand it off to Lisa to get us started.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Daniel and Lauren, for asking me to join you. This is very exciting. I have to say 10 minutes, I don't know, Daniel. When it comes to career advice, I could probably go on for hours. So I will I'll try to keep my presentation focused. Just to give you a quick overview of who I am, I've been working in career development for 11 years now. I just sit here and do the math, and it's 11 years. And I was with the most relevant, I think, to this presentation, I was with the Master Public Health program for 6 years at Western. So I am somewhat familiar with this area, and currently I'm the Experiential Learning and Placement Coordinator with Health Sciences at Western, working with undergraduate students. Next slide, Lauren. So when I talked to Daniel and Lauren, we talked about a number of different things that I could speak about, and I decided to focus on 2 particular areas because these are ones that I think during this time right now that you can be forging ahead with. So networking, and then talking a little bit about additional training and experience. Next slide. So I just want to, I'm sure everybody's heard of networking. Just want to give a quick highlight because I think it's something that we always want to keep in mind, especially when you're in job search mode. When you're in job search mode, you're kind of narrow, you're thinking, I need to find a job. Networking is a big part of job searching, but we have to keep in mind that it's mutually beneficial. So it's not meant to be a one-sided, I need to find a job, therefore I'm going to connect with some people in my field to see if maybe they can help me find a job. It's transactional, it's mutually beneficial, it's a partnership, you're creating a network, web of connections. So always keep that in mind when you're making connections with people. At some point down the road, you're going to be able to help them out as well. Next slide. So when we talk about networking during this time, it's really interesting because we often think of networking as attending events, going to conferences, going to sessions, talking to people, getting to know people. When we're doing that type of networking, we're interacting with people in groups. I remember in the NPH program, we'd have brown bag series and someone very important would come to speak to the students. And after the session, everybody would swarm that person and try to connect with them, try to talk to them. There's also one-on-one interactions. And that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit about information meetings. So when you think about which is more impactful, definitely the one-on-one interaction is more impactful. And the advantage of the time right now is that that's really your only option. I think we are going to probably see some virtual conferences coming up. It's going to be very difficult to network during those types of events, but that one-on-one connection that you can make with people in your field, that's the most impactful. And when you're talking about virtual networking, which is really your only option right now, I think it's a little bit easier. I think, you know, people are sitting around on their computers. They're on their email. You're going to catch somebody's attention a little bit easier right now. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Next slide. When I work with students, I always suggest that you plan. Okay, don't just sit down and think, oh yeah, I'm going to contact that person and reach out or contact another person. Think about what you're interested in. Sit down and take a step back. Focus your goals and your interests. You maybe do have a lot of time right now, but you want to make sure you're still approaching this strategically. Do your research. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Make sure you're keeping your list manageable. You might think you have all the time in the world right now to reach out to lots of different people, but when it comes to starting to set up meetings, you want to make sure you have that availability. So if you're reaching out to too many people and you're getting responses and setting up meetings, you might find yourself in a little bit of a challenge trying to manage your schedule. Make sure you prepare in advance. And this is the important thing, is make sure that you've left that door open for the continued partnership. And that is a little bit of a tricky thing to do. Next slide. So 2 different ways that you can find people to network with. I'm sure you already have some people in mind, but these are 2 different strategies that you can attempt to identify some people that you can reach out to. And now I apologize to Daniel and Lauren. You guys are my test subjects during this. I decided to use you as my research. So next slide. So say, for example, I was searching around global health and I decided, oh, CanWaCH, okay, that's an interesting organization. So I'm going to go on their website and I'm going to search through. I'm going to look at all the different people that work there. And I'm going to try to find 1 or more people who have jobs that seem interesting, something that I might be interested in. So I've done that. I've gone on the CanWaCH website, and there's Lauren. So she looks like she has kind of an interesting job. So I'm going to put Lauren on my list as somebody that I want to connect with. Next slide. Another way that you can do research is on LinkedIn. The first thing I'm going to say about LinkedIn is do not start doing any research until you have a good LinkedIn profile, because those people that have paid LinkedIn accounts, if you search them, they can see who searched them. And if you don't have a good profile, it's just not going to look very professional. And the other thing about having a good profile too is that you might catch their interest. They might say, okay, wait a minute, this is somebody that I might, be interested in connecting with. So I tried to, in these screenshots, to show you what I researched. So in that search box at the top, I just typed in global health research. And then at the bottom, you can see, well, sorry, right under that, you can see purple, or sorry, people. You can see lots of purple. People, because I narrowed it down to people. So I wanted to see people who worked in global health research. Beside that, it says first. Now, I purposely clicked on first because I knew I was going to use Daniel and just wanted to find his profile quickly. But if you're looking for new people to connect with, you'd probably want to change that to, I can't remember the options, but you'd want to take out all your first person connections. So that's going to eliminate people you're already connected with, on LinkedIn. So then I found Daniel, and I can read a little bit about Daniel's experience and where he's working, and I think, okay, so Daniel might be somebody I'd like to connect with. Next slide. So then I'm going to find them. So when I went to the CanWaCH website, I searched around, I couldn't find Lauren's email address. So I didn't know how to contact her. And that's probably on purpose by the organization, because sometimes they don't want to be easy to find. But one of my favorite things is to dig around and try to find people. So I go to Google and I search Lauren Murray CanWaCH email. Lo and behold, after going through a few different results, you can't really see what it is because I tried to screenshot it, but basically found a link, I think it was from a conference, scroll down and there's Lauren's email address. I would do this when I was searching for practicum contacts. So when I was with the MPH program and had to find organizations and reach out to people when I was looking for practicum placements, this is what I would do, is I would search people's names and got very excited when I found somebody. Next slide. So I've got Lauren's email address now, and I'm going to reach out to her, and I'm going to ask her for an information meeting. And unfortunately, I can't get too much into information meetings now, but if you do a Google search on information meetings or information interviews, there's lots of information there. But basically what you're doing is you're connecting one-on-one with professionals in your field. You're building your network, but you're also learning from them. You're learning about the field they work in, you're learning about the organization they work for, and you're generally seeking some advice on career opportunities in the field, potentially some career advice. And remember, this is that mutually beneficial professional relationship that you want to build. Next slide. So these slides are going to go around. You'll have a chance to look at them. I just highlighted a few different areas that you could focus on for questions, but one that I bolded there, and I always think as students and young professionals, you are in the best place right now to be requesting these information meetings. I'm 20 years in my career. If I start requesting information meetings, especially when I've been working in my job for a year, probably means that I'm starting to look at a different job. But with you, students, young professionals, you're really looking to figure out what's out there. You're looking to learn. Something I added in here, and this honestly I stole from my presentations in the MPH program, but something I added in here was asking about their experience with COVID-19, so how that's maybe impacted their job, and how generally it's impacting careers in global health, because that will help you start to focus where you want your career to go. Next slide. Just a couple of helpful tips that I throw in there when you're talking about information meetings. I usually say to students to bring your resume. Now, remember we talked about how you don't want to put your resume in front of them to say, okay, if you have any opportunities, let me know. A different way you can get your resume in front of somebody that you're networking with is, I've been working on my resume, trying to target it to this particular field. You've been in the field for a long time. I'm wondering if maybe you wouldn't mind having a look at my resume and just give me a little bit of feedback. They have your resume, but it's a good way then to get their feedback. Another thing I always recommend is that you ask if there's somebody else in their network who you might be able to connect with. This is where you start to build that network. Make sure you thank them, send them a thank you email, that follow up, and then make sure you can stay in touch. Like I mentioned, that's a tricky thing to do. One of the benefits of asking for other people in their network to connect with is that then you can follow up and say, you know, thank you so much for connecting me with so-and-so. I had a great call with them. You know, they were able to share some great information. And so it's another way to kind of loop back and connect with the person. Next slide. Another thing I decided to focus on was some additional training and experience that you can get. If you've got some spare time on your hands, you're sitting at home, you can't go anywhere, you've got a computer, there are a lot of different opportunities that you can look into right now. And some of them, a lot of them are free. Next slide. So again, you're going to get these slides. So you'll have all of these links, but just a few different organizations that offer some additional training. If you're looking if evaluation is something you're interested in, or project management. Lean Sigma, it's really interesting. The Ontario Public Health Association often runs these certifications. I don't believe they are right now, probably because they were mostly in person, but keep an eye on their website if that's something you're interested in. LinkedIn Learning, tons and tons of stuff. I actually ended up down a little bit of a rabbit hole this morning when I was double checking that LinkedIn Learning thing. I was like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, I can do this. I can learn about this. So that's a really great place. Your school, if you're in school, they may have an account, or if you're alum, they may have an account through LinkedIn Learning. Next slide. A couple of other things. Sick Kids Hospital offers a certificate in knowledge translation, which I think might be relevant to some of you. And these are also some links for learning more about some of the statistical software. Next slide. What you can do right now, and actually it's really kind of beneficial, because if you're looking to do something in person, you're bound by your geographical location. Whereas right now, pretty much everything you see posted is virtual. So you can get opportunities to do some volunteer work, maybe with an association, or some research, you know, working with some not-for-profit organizations that are maybe focused on some of the COVID-19 efforts. Employment. The one thing I say right now with employment is be very, very flexible, be very open to different opportunities. You don't have to relocate. So if you take a position or a contract that's 2 weeks, it's not a big deal. You don't have to move for that. Consider opportunities outside of your field. You can always, no matter what job you're doing, build on transferable skills. Things are moving very, very slowly right now. There are a lot of unknowns. So especially when it comes to hiring, just be prepared for that. Be very patient. Next slide. And these are just a few articles that I came across when I was looking into this topic a little bit more. Really good articles that expand on some of the things that I talked about, looking for some advice for, or it's some information for new grads, for students. So have a look at those. Some of them are American, but definitely relevant to us as well. So thank you. Hopefully you found that informative, and I'll see if there are any questions at the end.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. That was super informative. I think I speak for everyone when I say, you know, the 10 minutes probably isn't enough time to talk about all of this stuff. There was some great tips and strategies, you know, with regards to searching for positions and opportunities and for building networks. So I'm sure we'll continue the discussion in the Q&A. So we'll go ahead and shift over to Alli. Alli, feel free to take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel and Lisa. That was fantastic, and I think aligns nicely with what I will be talking about, focusing in on how to interview virtually. So my name is Alli, and I'm the Manager of Programs and Operations at CanWaCH. As a little bit of a background about me, I went to the University of Ottawa and have my undergrad in International Development and Globalization, and then have a master's in Global Development Studies, and have somehow found myself managing human resources at CanWaCH, which I don't think I had initially foreseen in terms of my own career journey. But I think it only highlights and showcases the ways in which we need to be adaptable, to focus in on transferable skills as we enter into the workplace, and to reflect on the fact that sometimes our careers take interesting pathways, and that it's all stepping stones to the next positions that we look forward to as well. So I think when we look at some of the trends that we're seeing in hiring practices right now, especially in terms of CanWaCH's approach to hiring, as a completely virtual organization that has no brick and mortar anywhere in Canada, we all work from home offices. There have been some things that we've learned over the past few years in terms of how to hire in a virtual workplace that I think we're seeing more and more across the nonprofit sector now. So we're seeing an upswing in virtual hiring, virtual orientations, organizations that are adapting within COVID-19, but I think we'll see this trend continuing on into the future as well in many instances. We also know that the job market is increasingly competitive as well. There's more and more grads, more and more people who know that this is the career that they want to take and the pathway that they want, but not necessarily matched with always the type of growth in the job market at the same time. So we know that we need to put our best foot forward at all moments too. So when we look at what an interview is, we wouldn't go run a marathon without training. At least I definitely would not. And I wouldn't walk into an interview without also doing my homework and my research and training my interview muscles at the same time. So if we look at an interview as one part within a life course of going from building the skills and experiences to build up your resume, to building up a resume that is really tailored to a job description, to receiving an actual interview, there's some specific things that we can do to tailor and hone our interview muscles. Thanks for flipping the slide. So before you interview, there's a couple things that you can do to build up your muscles. One of the things, especially within a virtual context, is to take the time in advance to test your technology and test your systems. So most of the operating systems, if you know that you're going to be operating in a virtual interview, you can head on, test your video, test your audio, test your sound, sign on with your friend onto Zoom or onto Skype and make sure that everything is set up really well. When you get an interview, you will likely have limited time in which to prepare for an interview. But really, what makes for an excellent interview, no matter whether it's in person or virtual, is practice, practice, practice. And you can practice certain things before you actually know that you have a specific interview. So there's whole data banks online that you can just search for typical interview questions, where you just run through and you practice. Pull in your mom, your best friend, your colleague, and sit down for a half hour at the kitchen table or on your Zoom call and practice answering interview questions, just your typical generic interview questions. When you actually have an interview that you're preparing for, though, you need to make sure that you are researching. And I can't highlight this enough. The people who have really impressed me in interviews are those who've demonstrated that they, A, know the job description really, really well, and B, know the organization well, that they are thinking proactively about how they fit within the organization at the same time too. So what this actually looks like is reading through the job description line by line and looking at what you would think or what you could see typical interview questions being for this position. So if you have a policy-focused job description versus a gender-focused versus a comms-focused versus a research-focused, the types of questions that will be asked will be slightly different, but you can assume that you will have behavioral questions, where they'll be trying to assess whether you're a good fit, situational questions where it's what would you do if, and then there will be specific expertise questions as well that they will be asking you. So you can try to come up with a list of questions of things that you think they could be asking. There's also data banks online for this as well, and practice your answers. Write down jotted points about what you would want to use as an example. Come up with like an example database of different experiences that you've had and how they would fit within this job in this context. Next slide, please. During the interview, what I would recommend is signing on early to make sure that you're on and prepared. There are very few people who actually just miss an interview, but it might be that they're signing on right as you sign on and their technology isn't quite working. And you can put your best foot forward by being there, being on time, being early, being prepared, making sure that all of your technology works. And then also having a chance for you to also just take a deep breath before everything starts as well, because interviewing can be a little bit nerve-wracking. I think in particular, when you're looking at a virtual interview, it's hard to really read body language and be friendly. There's less of the opportunity for that little quick banter back and forth and social conversation at the get-go. And you need to remember that all they can see is from your shoulders up. So they can't see you nervously twiddling your fingers, which is probably good. But at the same time, if you have a somewhat neutral expression on your face, they can't tell whether you're engaged or not. So it's up to you to be more proactive in your body language. I've noticed, say, Daniel has been nodding his head as I'm speaking and as Lisa was speaking as well. And that goes a long way in terms of creating rapport, even if it's online as well. So little things like that, as well as at the very beginning, jump in with a question of, even if it's, can you guys hear me okay? Is my audio okay? Just testing the ground and creating a little bit of a rapport goes a long way when you're actually going then through the interview. As you're doing the interview, take notes. Nobody is going to dock you points for wanting to take the time to be thoughtful in your responses, especially if questions are asking you, for example, in this situation, what are the 3 things that you would do? If you're not noting down what those 3 things are as you're talking and as you are wrapping your brain around the response, you may forget one, and that will be noted by the interviewer. So take the chance to write down your 3 things, even if it's just one word for each, or write down the number 3, just so that you know that you're fully answering the questions. What I would also say is that in your responses, you want to make sure that you're really targeted and concise in your responses. This is not the moment to talk about your grandma or your past weekends and what you've done. It's really about the job and the job description and how your expertise fits within that. So as concise as possible is best. I know sometimes when we get nervous, we tend to babble or we tend to talk a lot, but keeping it concise, keeping it targeted, will go a long way, because it also then provides you the opportunity to, at the end, ask questions. On to the next slide, please. So when you are done at the end of the interview, you will likely have a portion of time when you get to ask questions as well. And I can't highlight this enough, that come with prepared questions. Come with questions that you want to ask, in particular to workplace culture, and how they manage their employees, how they treat performance reviews, how they integrate X into their organization. It can be about the actual job, but about how what type of organization you want to work for. And it can be a little bit nerve-wracking when you're first starting on your career to think through, well, what are the questions that I even want to ask? And they can be as generic or as particular as possible. So have a list of, say, 5 that you can pull from online. There's, again, data banks about questions to ask at the end. Make sure that you have some set questions. And if possible, as the interview is happening, pull out 1 more question, 1 or 2 more questions that you want to follow up on. This also gives you the opportunity, if there's anything that you feel like you haven't highlighted enough in the interview, or anything that you feel you have missed or haven't fully articulated, this is your chance to circle back as well and say, you know, I just really want to highlight X. And then I think that there is no harm in demonstrating that you're excited by the opportunity, you're excited by this position, you're excited by meeting potential colleagues, and at the end to say thanks and follow up by email as well. I think that's one of the key things that people often forget, is write that short little email within 1 day, within 24 hours. It doesn't need to be long. It could be connecting in, say, if you were talking about a particular research topic, you could share an article that you had just been reading. Or if you were talking about, we had someone recently who shared a UN process that we had been talking about in the during her interview. And it actually goes a long way to show that there's that continued interest, that demonstrated initiative, and how they would be a good fit within the workplace because they really care about this position and care about this job. But that interview email afterwards goes a really, really long way. And then at the end, it's about just really highlighting your skills and keeping it targeted, keeping it relevant to the job as well. And I think that's really the key. And I think I'll leave it there. I'm really curious about your questions and happy to answer anything. And I also have a passion for writing really strong resumes at the same time on the same type of model of making it targeted and tailored, especially within a competitive work environment as well. So looking forward to the Q&A. And back to you, Daniel.
Great, thanks, Alli. That was fantastic. A lot of really good advice for interviews that kind of stands the test of time, I guess, but also some very important considerations for this virtual environment, especially your expressions, checking your tech, signing on early. I think those are all really good tips. Like Alli said, we'll be heading into our question and answer session just after Ryan there. So as you go, please feel free to enter any questions you may have in the chat box, and we'll read them off at that time. So our last speaker today is Ryan Kennery. So Ryan, I'll just invite you to take the floor and go ahead.
Thanks very much. I just want to begin my presentation. I know there's folks logging in from maybe across Canada, maybe around the world. I just wanted to start by recognizing I'm on unceded Algonquin territory, and the place we now know as Ottawa. My name is Ryan Kennery. I'm a senior strategist at MediaStyle. We're a progressive communications firm. First off, I wanted to thank Daniel and Lauren for the invite, mostly because it gave me a chance to trim my quarantine beard a little bit, which was nice. An excuse to go and kind of even virtually see people was kind of nice. But for folks, also kind of living the isolation lifestyle, I am still wearing sweatpants, so that's good. I think further the points about body language and camera angles, things like that. I think that's always very helpful. Just wanted to start by giving a little bit of background about myself and kind of my career journey. I think that's sometimes helpful when you're talking about careers. It's just for folks to kind of know the steps that I've taken to kind of get where I am today. I'll get maybe the next slide. I should have had like a hand motion or something. Education. So I studied print journalism in college. The reason I ended up in print journalism was when you're 16, 17 in high school, and they're just like, hey, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? Decide now. I decided, I like writing, so I'll go into journalism. Print journalism is an interesting piece of that. Solid career options in print journalism, as you can tell. But I ended up getting very involved in student government when I was in college in my hometown in Oakville. I ended up going on the other side of things in student government, being more on the PR communication side, which kind of led me to my undergrad and my master's in communications. Another, I think, really good interview tip for folks who are doing interviews remotely over Zoom or Skype, things like that, is you can visibly put your credentials behind you. That's one approach to doing things. So that's shared, and then I went to U of O twice, so builds credibility, I find. In terms of my after I finished school, I worked at the City of Ottawa as a bureaucrat working in communications for a number of years. I started in public health, ended up more in the corporate communications realm. I ended up going on the political side of City Hall after that, working for Ottawa's current mayor, Jim Watson, for a number of years as his press secretary and his director of communications. And I've been with MediaStyle now for about 4 years. Actually ended up at MediaStyle through a former classmate at the University of Ottawa. We had classes with him. She's our CEO now at MediaStyle, so I was grateful to join the team there. So that's kind of my general background. If you want to go to the next slide, really I think my role here, what I was asked to really talk about is especially for folks who are finishing university or college, who are starting their career, looking at the pool of available jobs for them. And I wanted to maybe emphasize the keeping your options open in terms of looking at non-NGO, non-for-profit type organizations, and also looking at the private sector. So the key message I'm going to kind of get across is the private sector is not entirely bad. There are lots of for-profit folks out there, but there is ways to be involved in a business or the private sector in a way, but still have a really strong commitment to your to your beliefs and to try to make the world a better place. And kind of using our company of MediaStyle as a case study, I wanted to talk about some of the kinds of ways that we are in the private sector, but we are helping some of the folks that you might want to help, and working with some of the folks that you maybe there isn't space for you on that organization staff, but working for a company with a social conscious like MediaStyle, or like some of the others that are peers in our industry and our world, the way we look at the world, the way we approach our problems, maybe that might open up a whole other section of jobs for you in the future. Did you want to hit to my next slide? So once again, just using our company MediaStyle as a case study, and I'm not going over this as sort of a sales pitch. I'm not here to get you to buy anything or anything like that. But just once again, there are organizations and companies out there that maybe apply the same principles to the way they do their work, and maybe just wanted to kind of switch on some light bulbs in terms of maybe looking at those for a career option for you. So for about MediaStyle, once again, as a case study, we're a progressive communications agency, a public affairs agency. We do comms agency stuff. So we'll do strategic communications. So we'll do communications plans for folks who are trying to launch ideas or policies or campaigns out into the world. That will sometimes involve doing workshops, things like that, to help them kind of maybe break log jams, to come to a consensus on things, to design branded communication material, to do calls to action, to encourage people to contact their member of parliament, things like that. We'll do media training to make sure that folks who happen to be spokespeople on behalf of an organization, they feel comfortable in front of the camera, whether they're going to be on on TV or on the radio, or just be able to provide a background as a subject matter expert to a journalist, making sure that they kind of put their best foot forward when it comes to that. We do a lot of the digital realm as well. We do a lot of social media content creation. We're a smaller team. We're only about 9 or 10 employees. So in there we get we have a team of strategists. We're doing a lot of writing work, a lot of content development work. We have a couple designers we work with, and we have a network of contractors that we trust and we work with to do things like videos and perhaps do websites, things like that. So it's a small team, but we're able to really make a really important impact. So what I've described right there is kind of your standard comms agency, the stuff that we typically do. What kind of sets us apart and makes us different? And this is the kind of the message I wanted to get across today, is if you look more critically at the kinds of things that we're doing, the people we're working with, the principles we're using and applying to our work, that's kind of what makes things different. And that might make certain organizations or companies in the private sector a good place for you and your passions, your skill set. Because what we do at MediaStyle is we only work with people that we feel are trying to make the world a better place. And to give you a little bit of background, when I was considering where to go after my time in politics, I was looking at a couple different options. MediaStyle was one of them. I also had another in talks with another kind of comms agency, PR agency, kind of your standard PR agency, and I asked to see their client list, and their shirt like said, no problem. Here you go. Here's a client list, and it was this gas company and this airline and this big business, and really didn't speak to me. What really drew me to MediaStyle was the fact that I would work exclusively with folks who are trying to make a difference in the world. I just want to head to my next slide. I'll give you some examples of some of our pillars. So, we're committed to improving health outcomes for Canadians. So with that, we're working with organizations that are trying to bring on board universal pharmacare, things like that, who are trying to improve health systems for everyone, improve access to healthcare for folks in Canada or around the world. Believe in education, universal access to it. We work with a lot of, I'll call subject matter experts, researchers, that sometimes there's a translation that needs to take place between education and research and in the general public or that target audience. So ourselves as the folks who are in the middle, trying to work with folks on either side to kind of translate things into plain language, which sometimes can be very hard if you're a subject matter expert and you're very focused on it. So we're working with folks to make sure that they can make a bigger impact in that realm. We're dedicated to reconciliation, support like-minded individuals and organizations. So we work with a lot of national Indigenous organizations. We do some work with some of the governments up north, things like that. We intend on improving and enhancing democratic institutions. So we've worked with folks who've done a lot of research in terms of improving parliament, improving democratic systems. We're proud feminists and work towards equity for all. We also support the labor movement and aspire to build a stronger society. I'll go to my next slide. I'll give you some other examples. These are just our client mix. But if folks who are looking at working maybe with different businesses who provide services similar to us. So some of the good people we work with NGOs, nonprofits, member-based organizations, environmental climate change organizations, those who are focused on the climate crisis, Indigenous groups, foundations, charities, academic research organizations. So, we, as a comms agency, we could work with anybody, but we choose not to. We choose to, kind of play in a very small pool of folks who are trying to move the needle on a number of different important social issues. So that's really what we're focused on. Go ahead to our next slide. But here are kind of 3 other ways that we demonstrate our commitment. And these are perhaps things you might be able to look at when you're evaluating whether you want to work for a company. So we're a social enterprise. By that, we actually put aside a certain amount of revenue every year to either pro bono or reduced rate work for folks who are trying to make a difference. So that allows us to perhaps do work for folks that maybe wouldn't have the means to invest in a communication strategy. So we take on a certain amount of pro bono work as a team a couple times a year. So we'll collaborate on a specific project. So for example, we'll do media relations work for an event that's doing a hacking health event that we're looking at improving healthcare or improving technology for healthcare. Also, we give each of our team members a set of pro bono hours every month that we expect that folks would use them. So with that, a lot of folks will join a board of directors for a community group. We've got folks who do little, they'll do like a workshop for a youth organization in our community, those sorts of things. So we encourage folks to go and apply from our social enterprise purpose, be able to go and help that. So, we do make profit as a business, but we are putting a portion of that, and a lot of that is the time that we put into work, give it and put it into to helping folks who maybe wouldn't be able to work with us otherwise. Also certified B Corp. I'll get into specifics around that in a second. But what that is a certification that a business of any sort may choose to undertake that demonstrates their commitment to the people and the planet. So there's an evaluation criteria that a business would go through, and there's an assessment where you get a score, and you can say you're certified B Corp at the end of that if you do pass that accreditation. So that's sometimes maybe kind of a label on a product, so to speak, that you might want to look at as something in terms of making a choice of whether you want to work for a company. Because what it does is it shows that you're not just committed to profit, you're committed to how you're treating people, how you're treating your workers, how you're treating the constituencies where you work, and also you're there to support the planet as well. So you're taking various sustainability steps to make sure you're doing a good job there. We're also a WageMark employer, so our top salary for the highest paid employee is no more than 3 times our lowest paid employee. WageMark, you'll see different kinds of WageMarks in different kinds of organizations. Ours is 3 to 1. So basically, it shows that we're making sure that someone who is perhaps more entry level isn't that far off from someone who might be the CEO or something like that. So it's our kind of a demonstration of commitment that we make, and we put sort of those logos on our proposals and some of our internal documents to show our commitment to that. Go ahead to head to our next slide. I just wanted to just take a very brief second to talk about B Corp as one of those accreditations, because there are different ways to look at different businesses in this regard. And, you can go on the B Corp website and you can go and take a look at companies or suppliers, things like that, that maybe you may wish to work with. If you're in an organization now that you may have the choice of buying a certain product or procuring a certain service from someone, this is sort of a social lens you may be able to apply to who you want to do business with. So you'll see from here, this is our B Corp score, and this is what public information that's on the B Corp website, kind of gives us the ranking, because I think we have to be research certified. I believe it's every 2 years. So you'll see our ranking in our area on each level. Our environmental score is low. It has been low in the past because we didn't have access to composting in our heritage building, but we just got a compost before we had to go work from home. So get pumped. Our marks should go up pretty soon. I'm pretty excited about it. I really like my green bin here in Ottawa. You head to my next slide. So things to look for an employer, these are all things that I think when people are thinking about doing interviews or seeking jobs, our other 2 panelists spoke really well about the networking components, the preparing for the interviews. But almost what's even more important is who you're applying to in the first place. Maybe the questions you even ask in that interview. So I think that you can look for things such as, certifications such as B Corp. I trust that there are others out there. That's the one that we go off of. The other, special acronym to kind of look at, especially in some of the larger organizations, Corporate social responsibility, so CSR. So some large organizations will have a formal department or a series of initiatives that are focused on giving back in the community. Sometimes it'll be a day every year where they're going and they're working in the community, or they have a series of initiatives. That's the ways that they do to help folks. So I think sometimes when you look at those and look at those very critically, it could be a really great opportunity to see and evaluate maybe if this is the right fit for you. So it might be a company that's selling widgets, but maybe there's a whole other component of the company that is exclusively focused on making an impact in an area in which that you're very passionate about. So that could be an opportunity for you to find it in that way as well. So ask those questions. How do they treat people on the planet? There are different ways to treat employees. Making sure there's adequate time off. There's parental leave provisions. That I mentioned the wage mark component. People are being fairly compensated for their work. They don't do unpaid internships. They actually pay their interns. Those sorts of things. Showing those commitments to treating people well, I think, are important. And the planet is important too. It's not just a matter of saying, great, we do a tree planting day every year. But if you can also show the ways that you are making improvements to your business practices or offering incentives for employees, at MediaStyle, what we've done in the past is we've offered, interest-free loan for anyone who wants to buy a bike, those sorts of things, providing different sorts of incentives of folks who are able to make greener, more sustainable choices are ways for people to kind of put their money where their mouths are. So you want to head to my next slide? I can't remember what's next. I think that might be it. Oh, general advice. Great. There's my two pieces of advice just to close. And once again, I'll just do a call out, encourage folks to, I see that there's some questions starting to come in. Feel free to drop some more questions in the box there. And I know we're going to have a Q&A session just after this. The general advice, get involved. As I said from my experience in the beginning, I learned just as much inside the classroom, or I learned more outside the classroom than I think I did inside the classroom. So despite, having the accreditations and degrees I have, I learned more sometimes, working in a student government office or in a boardroom in the Senate when I was a University of Ottawa student than I did perhaps in my, philosophy class during my undergrad. Any opportunity I had to, run a campaign on campus allowed me to kind of develop the muscles that I think I use later down the line, and allowed me to develop kind of skills that kept me employed, especially in the early days of my career, where I was able to kind of do a couple things in the graphic design realm or the writing realm that I think impressed employers when I was earlier in my career. The last piece I'll say is do the work. So I think in any opportunity you have to showcase and show that you can do the thing that the folks are asking you to do, especially this is, I think, related to the get involved line. I've hired people during my career. I couldn't tell you exactly what their degree or their specialization or however they package university degrees these days, exactly precisely what their major or minor was. What I could tell you is that they were a kick-ass writer. Or they really impress us in the interview, or we put them through a test where they had to develop a social media campaign. It was super, super impressive. So a lot of times, really, if you're able to showcase that you can do it through a portfolio, through acing that test, or really having a really well-packaged application, to me, as someone who's sometimes on the other side of the hiring table, it's more impressive to me if you can show you can do the work than anything else. So that's kind of my closing thought. Thanks so much for everyone for taking time to listen. I'm looking forward to answering some questions.
Great, thank you so much, Ryan. I really appreciate Ryan's perspective on things. We talked about this quite a bit, but graduating or going into global health, sometimes we think that's limited to maybe the NGO sector or maybe research. But I think what Ryan's highlighted here is that there's a lot of other avenues for global health work, and perhaps the private sector is something to explore, and that it's not all entirely bad, as Ryan said there. So I think we're going to go ahead and move to the questions. We might have time for maybe one or two there. The chat box is kind of blown up with your questions. These are all fantastic, and we'll try and follow up on as many of them as we can. I guess the first one that we'll pose to all of our panelists, whoever wants to jump in, is do you have any advice for people who don't have any global or public health experience or specific education, but might want to break into this industry? And this, I think this kind of translates, to other fields as well. Like, say you don't have experience in a certain field, how would you go about maybe breaking into that field? And I'll turn it over to whoever wants to jump onto that question.
I can speak to that. That happened in my own career. I used to practice law, and then I decided to quit that and go into career development. And I remember being asked in an interview about making that transition. I think this relates to maybe another question that was asked as well. And focusing on what the overlap is, those transferable skills, making that connection for the employer as to what you do have that might contribute to that particular field. It is tricky, because you're going to find there are people that have that specific education that they might be looking for. With some of the additional training and certifications, if you can pick up some things there that, sorry, I'm getting things popping up on my computer. If you can look at some of those and maybe start to gain some skills, some training in the area that maybe isn't formal education, that could be helpful.
Yeah, trying to jump onto that, I think it's always good to unpack, not look so narrowly at the idea of or sector X. You need to break it down perhaps into some other settings as well. So maybe it's about the core tasks of the job and what you need to get across. So, it's not just writing about global health, it's writing. So focus on the ways that you can be a good writer. It's not just member engagement in global health, it's member engagement, ways that you've developed or showcased stakeholder development skills, relationship building skills, those sorts of things. I think all of those can be really important. If you can just kind of break it down into those smaller pieces. I think that's, probably allows you to be more flexible. I have for example, I have a master's degree in communication, but for when I need folks to be aware of it, I technically have a health communications degree because it was at the time at the University of Ottawa where they were like, give you streams of programs. But if I don't need to have a health comms master's, I have a comms master's. And if I'm doing government work, technically I wrote my thesis on government comms. And actually, if you need it to be crisis comms, actually it's crisis comms. So you can find ways to repack, and you're not being dishonest or disingenuous. What you're doing is you're emphasizing the points of your background that can kind of be beneficial. The other one small point I would have is just like, join a board of directors or volunteer for a local community health organization. I think if you can kind of have that little notch there to say, as an example of ways that you contribute. No, it's not on the global scale, but it's still in the same sector. So if you can find ways to roll up your sleeves and do that, I think you might be able to find a good place there.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I can just jump onto that as well. Health to me is about rights and it's about social justice at the same time. So look for those moments and those opportunities where you've built up that particular skill set. And something that really impressed upon me when I was coming into the global health sector is the way that jobs layer on top of each other, which is kind of what Lisa and Ryan have been saying, is that you can be working in, say, a global health organization, but I work in human resources and finances and operations and proposal development, whereas my colleagues work in communications and other colleagues work in programming and M&E with overseas partners. So there's a slice and dice and like a layering on of different positions and the ways that you can work within organizations as well.
Great. Those are all very useful tips. And I think they speak a lot to a bunch of the questions there is how do we repackage some of those things from different areas of our experience and put it towards a new opportunity or a new field. So I think that really touches on a lot of different questions that are there. We have time for one more question, just 5 minutes left. I can't believe it's almost 2 p.m. already. But the question I wanted to ask, or that seems to be popping up in the chat box, seems to be around reaching out to potential employers and keeping that conversation going. So there's how many times do you email someone? Is it appropriate to ask for feedback? So I guess to kind of wrap up all of those questions in more of a general question, when you're reaching out to employers, how do you build that relationship in a virtual setting? Because as you said, we're not able to go to conferences and the like. Is it appropriate to follow up? Like what sort of tips may you be able to provide in terms of doing that kind of cold call work with potential employers?
I can jump in there. It is tricky, you know, when somebody's getting so many emails coming into their email box to stand out amongst, you know, everything else that's coming in. I think there was a question asked about an email subject line, keeping that very targeted, something to the effect of, you know, seeking career information in global health, or seeking career guidance in global health or public health, whatever it is that you're looking at. Keeping those emails very brief, always making sure you have an ask in the email. Your ask, you know, if you are looking for an information meeting, is, you know, would you have 20 minutes to set up a call, interested in learning your perspectives on whatever. I've received emails from people that just tell me stuff, and I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what they're asking for. In all honesty, I've not replied to some of those emails. The building relationships part is really tricky, and that's a huge part of my job with being a practicum coordinator. And what you need to do, one of the most important things, is you need to pay attention to the other person. So if you're sending, you know, say you send an interesting article to somebody that you've connected with. I mean, Alli talked about following up after a job interview. You know, somebody you've networked with, you send them something, hey, you know, saw this and thought of you. You don't hear back. And then maybe you connected with one of their people in their network, and then you email them, thanks for introducing me to so-and-so, and you don't hear back. Probably at that point, back off a little bit. You know, but take the lead, or not take the lead, but make sure you're paying attention to the other person as well. Some people you'll have great relationships with. It will just flow. It will be natural. You'll stay in touch with that person. They'll become part of your network. You'll see them throughout your career. Other people, it will end up being, you know, a one-time interaction, and you just have to be flexible to that. Yeah, would be my advice.
Yeah, I would say things like following them on social media, liking their content, engaging with their content, you know, allows you to have your name pop up in their feed in a non-aggressive way. It just shows that you're interested in that. It shows that you're, you know, supporting them in the online space, which, you know, can be a really a helpful thing for organization. You know, some folks, if you like their tweet or retweet their comment, you know, that can be really useful to them. So it's not just what's happening inside that email inbox, but it's also the ways that you're trying to build, you know, tastefully a relationship online with them. You know, it could look like a private Twitter list where you're specifically focusing on, you know, reaching out to or, you know, amplifying a few people every day on social media. I think if you can do what you can to build credibility about the subject matter online, I think when the time comes to make the ask, it'll land on much better ears.
Great. That's really great advice, I think, from both of you. Unfortunately, we're going to have to cut it short there. I think I speak for pretty much everyone on this call when I say we could be going on for quite a bit of time talking with our three amazing presenters today. I wanted to thank them once again for donating some of their valuable time to speak with us this afternoon. You shared great tips and information. Lauren, if you could just go to the next slide. I hope you all found this webinar engaging and informative. If you'd like to continue the conversation, there's a couple of ways of doing so. One of those is to connect with us using any of the communication channels you see on this slide. If you'd like to connect with our speakers today, we can arrange for those connections to be made through that account. I'm sure they'd be happy to talk a little bit further about some of these things. And also check out the Ottawa Regional Hub while you're at it. We're looking to put on some more webinars, so please keep your eyes open for some future things coming on. And once again, I'd like to thank our presenters today. And that's it for now. Thank you very much for your time, everyone.
Thanks, Daniel and Lauren. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Take care.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.